good afternoon. Thanks to everyone for making the time to attend this webinar. In this constantly changing trade environment where we find ourselves, we are doing our best to find answers to questions from businesses. And that's why we've organized this webinar today. So my name is Wendy Stark. I'm the Director of Business Retention and Expansion at Invest Windsor Essex, and we are the lead economic development agency for the Windsor Essex region. We're pleased to host this webinar in collaboration with the Windsor Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce. As many of you know, the Chamber and Invest Windsor Essex are co-chairing the Windsor Essex Economic Trade Task Force, which was established on February 3rd and is comprised of community leaders and business associations and serves as a unified voice for economic development and trade in the Windsor Essex region. Task Force works to collect, coordinate, and disseminate information on strategies, programs, and other remedies to alleviate the impact this will have on the well-being of workers, entrepreneurs, businesses in the Windsor Essex regional economy. Please check out wetarifftaskforce.com for more information. So we're recording this webinar this morning, so I want to clearly state that the information shared is to the best of everyone's knowledge as of April 12th, 2025 at 12 p.m. As you all know, the rules can change on a daily basis, as we saw yesterday with the latest change in tariff policy out of the U.S. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which Windsor and Essex County are located is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We specifically recognize Caldwell First Nation and other First Nations, which have provided significant historical and contemporary contributions to this region. We also value the contributions of all original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. Just a few words about logistics for the webinar before we get started. We have quite a lot of questions that were submitted during the registration process, which is great. We will also be answering some live questions that you can put in the Q&A box. We will go back and forth between the pre-submitted and live questions. So you might not hear your question right away, but we will do our best to answer all the questions in the time allowed. If there are any that we don't have time for, we'll track these and we'll do our best to get you some answers following the webinar, possibly early next week. So now I would like to have our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Federica Nazzani.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you to Invest Windsor Essex and the Windsor Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to speak. I am Federica Nazzani. I'm the managing partner of Capital Assist. We are a business advisory firm. We do specialized accounting and financial services, and these include business valuations, transaction and deal advisory, forensic and litigation support, and of course, our accounting and tax services. I know we only have 1 hour to speak today, so we're going to be brief, but certainly welcome to look at the website for all our services. Thank you.
Thanks, Federica. And now we'll go to Mike Christia, please.
Hello, so I'm Mike Christia. I am a partner and leader of the Tariffs and Trade Advisory Group at M&P LLP. Our firm is a national firm with offices in very, very many cities of Canada. We effectively compete with the big four accounting firms, but we are specific to the private mid-market sector, so small and medium enterprises, many more Canadian enterprises among our client base. We offer services in 3 broad categories: accounting, tax, and business consulting. I myself, as I said, lead tariffs and trade, and we are happy to have any conversations about your business needs. As Federica said, we do have a website as well that you can visit, mnp.ca.
Great, thank you. And now Ray Fischer.
Yeah, you don't get a slide from me, but I've been in the trade and customs space for 35 plus years, all in Windsor, Essex, from the customs brokerage side of things. And then for 17 years, I was a manager of the customs group at a large multinational automotive company in Windsor. And then just in the last 6.5, 7 years, moved over to the consulting side of things, and just recently, like within a week, started at Doane Thornton. So excited to be here, excited to hopefully clear up some misconceptions, but please understand, as Wendy said, this is a never-changing landscape, and we'll do our best. And please follow up and to any of your trusted advisors for any follow-up questions.
Perfect. All right. Well, we're going to dive right in and get to the questions. So our first one will be, will our exposure to the on and off again tariff situation devalue our company's worth if we choose to sell? And I think I'm going to direct that one at Federica.
Thank you, Wendy. So, to start, I think the first principles of value is really that it's future looking. So what you as a seller are giving up is access to those future cash flows, and what the buyer is buying is those cash flows. And so between the fact that, it is future looking and a reflection of risk, you can expect that the uncertainty around tariffs will likely lead to impacts on business valuations. The broader implications on cash flows include things like slower ordering, productions, manufacturing, sales, market conditions that highlight faults in the supply chain, or potentially highlight things like concentration risk for customers or suppliers. All of that is going to impact cash flows, impact multiples, and therefore there may be broader implications to value. You're seeing this firsthand in the market volatility and the impact on market capitalization. Now, while there is hesitation, of course, good companies with good management will also see opportunities to accelerate some of their growth plans. So I think, to be brief, I think you have to be looking carefully, navigating carefully, and really taking a look at your underlying risks and cash flows when it comes to the value of your businesses.
Great, thank you. And just if any of the panelists have anything to add at the end of one person speaking, just please jump in. But we'll go on to the next question. What can we add, either a written statement or condition, to our U.S. customers' quotes, shippers, ultimately invoices, to protect our company's responsibilities in the tariff situation? So we're going to go to Mike for that one, please.
Right. So this I think is $1 million question, especially given the changing landscape. One day there's tariffs, one day there isn't. And in the event that you are committed to longer term pricing commitments, whether it be under some sort of master purchase order, some sort of project-based pricing sometimes, and you have those pricing commitments to your customers, of course, the cost impact of the tariff, if it materializes out of nothing, right, it is going to affect your bottom line, and then your profitability, and then ultimately the value of your company as well. It's hard to say. Specifics matter. What are we talking about in particular? What kind of product, what kind of contracting, what kind of delivery? Is it a delivery of product alone in a sale of product? Is it the delivery of a project that involves product pricing as well as service pricing, perhaps in some cases the erection of those equipment, materials, etc., at a site in the US? That said, things we have seen that do work in various circumstances include statements of the liability for import duties in contracts, statements of the liability for the event of additional import duties in contracts, statements of the responsibility of who acts as the importer of record directly responsible to the customs jurisdiction, right? So if you're not the party directly responsible to the customs authorities would first look to collect the tariff from that party who is directly responsible, which is the importer of record. So there are very many different mechanisms to consider here in terms of liability and responsibility assignment, as well as very many, documents, right, or media, I should say, in which you would include these types of statements. But the thinking is correct. You should be looking to, as much as possible, assign liabilities or share liabilities with your customers or with your suppliers where applicable in order to manage your risks.
Thank you. We do have a bit of a longer question here, so bear with me for a minute. And we do have, because we do have a number of systems integrators in Windsor, this might be applicable to several people on this call. As a system integrator, we purchase numerous components, fabrication steel, aluminum machine components, and so on. Systems and tools from the US, from Europe, Asia, China, India, and Canada. The equipment is integrated, staged on our floor in Windsor, and then following commissioning and customer approval, disassemble, package, ship equipment on numerous truck trailers. Could be 1 or 2 trucks to 150 trucks, depending on the size of the automation line, to the customer site for installation. What are the recommendations for importing components and exporting equipment to minimize tariff impacts? And I'll let Ray answer that one, please.
Yeah, so this, like you said and alluded to, Wendy, is this this will impact like a lot of companies within this region. And I'll break it down into two steps. So the first part of this, like you're getting multiple components from multiple suppliers, and it really breaks it down. So nothing really changes on creating your bill of material, taking a look at all those components, because really nothing has changed for substantiating the bill of material, country of origin, how it goes in. And we're going to get into, I know there's some other questions on here about tariff classification. That is one area in the customs world, and Mike can allude to this too. That's very complicated, especially when you have separate components coming in. And then what is being shipped across the border is the end product. So taking a look at that, taking a look at the customs tariff to find out what that product is crossing the border at is ultimately the classification that customs will need, in this case, the US. The issue that we have under the tariffs is, because of this changing landscape, like, does it qualify for CUSMA? And I'll just preface this. I will make reference to the free trade agreement between Mexico, U.S., and Canada's CUSMA, which just really stands for the Canada-U.S. Mexico agreement. They're all the same. It's the same free trade agreement. But because there's certain goods and there's certain misconceptions out there, because the U.S. has pivoted on some things. If the goods qualify for CUSMA, they could potentially be removed from the surtax pool. We get into a lot of other things with automobile parts and automotive, but on this question, it's really nothing has changed on making your bill of material, and then taking a look at what is the finished component, what is the finished good, and the proper tariff classification on that is ultimately is extremely important to ensure that you have that classified properly. The one thing on this 1 to 2 trucks or 1 to 150 trucks, unfortunately, the U.S. doesn't have a provision that Canada does for a provisional entry. So unfortunately, each truck would have to have a separate bill of material, or sorry, bill of lading, that clearly defines what the goods are. And there should be, and Mike alluded to this to his first answer, is the paperwork is extremely, extremely important to make sure. And even in the environment that we're in now, or especially the environment we're in now, is that commercial invoice is clearly stated of what are the goods crossing. You can put a statement in there, part of a larger, shipment, but there are no provisions. It has to be declared to CBP, like U.S. Customs, and then any duty or surtaxes that are applied will be applied on those shipments directly. The valuation piece of it, that is like outside of the scope of this discussion, Wendy, because it gets too complicated when like the valuation of a large component like that. But again, you'll probably hear me throughout is that's really where you would need to really reach out to your trusted advisors and just really try to look at because you like look at what is the proper way to value each individual shipment. And the big thing is mitigating the base, mitigating what the tariffs are charged on is extremely important, and looking for opportunities to again lower that base where the tariffs are.
I'll chime in really quickly here, Wendy, as well. So I think that the planning here involves disassembly and shipping disassembled across multiple shipments. So one of the things you want to watch out for there, Ray alluded to this, customs classification is very complex. And customs classification, which is to say what is a product, includes scenarios in which you're obligated to report multiple shipments as a single product by virtue of the fact that they are in fact simply a disassembled product. So there is some value to thinking about planning in this way, but there are also a lot of pitfalls, and I would absolutely recommend that you contact your trusted advisor, as Ray said, and have a more in-depth discussions about the specifics of your situation.
Great, thank you. We have a few live questions. I'm actually gonna take a stab at this one because it is what are some good resources to expand selling our products and services to European countries. So if you have not done this already, the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service is an exceptional resource. There are trade commissioners around the world in the various markets, and that's what they're there for. They are there to help you expand and sell your products into that market where they're situated. So they are typically located at either the consulate or the embassy in that country. The Ontario government also has senior economic advisors in many of those markets as well, and they work very well together. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, there's a gentleman who his name's Taylor Bentley. He covers this region, the Windsor-Essex region, among others, and he is usually the point of first contact, and he will connect you to whoever the region that you're selling into. Also want to mention the Can Export program is currently open. That will offset some of your costs to look at new markets. It has to be a market where you currently sell less than 10%. There's a bit of a change this time around because of the tariff situation. It used to be that you can apply for multiple different markets in 1 year. But right now, if you want to apply for examining the US market, and trade covers things like trade shows and that type of thing. If you're going to do the US, you can't combine that with anywhere else right now. But I can provide more information about that. It's a great program, and it does cover 50% of the eligible costs for that. So yeah, happy to provide some information. There are also the Ontario government also does a number of trade missions, where if you get to go on a trade mission with the group, they do tons of introductions to purchasing folks and stuff, in the various markets. So happy to connect further on that afterwards. And we'll go back. I think we're just going to go back to the original list of questions. We're going to go back and forth because we have a few in the chat right now, but a little bit more of a specific question here about code 9028.30, which is included. So this, I'm a little bit confused by the question. It's included in CUSMA, but excluded in USMCA. It's costing our customers 25% additional tax on delivery. What is the process, and who do I reach out to for resolution? So my understanding was that those were two different names for the same agreement, but then I heard yesterday in a different meeting something similar to this. So if I could go to Mike for that answer, please.
Of course. So there's certainly something misstated in this question, but I'll do my best to tell you what I looked up once I've received this question. So for one thing, 902830 is not part of the specific list of surtax, of goods subject to surtax for importation into Canada. So to the extent that the inclusion into CUSMA means included in the measures applicable, let's say from Canada, right? That doesn't appear to be the case. Excluding the USMCA, I've looked on the US side if perhaps we're talking about derivatives of steel or aluminum, where again we have classification specific references like this. That also does not appear to be the case. To the extent we're talking about rules of origin and how they might operate slightly differently on an interpretative basis between the US and Canada's application of what is otherwise the same text, Chapter 4 of the agreement, Chapter 4 of what Canadians call the CUSMA, what the US calls the USMCA. It's essentially the same agreement. So in Chapter 4, Rules of Origin, there's going to be the general rules of origin, the 4 criteria A through D under Article 4.2. Then you're going to have specific rules of origin under Annex 4B. If we're talking about the specific rules of origin for 9028.30, I would have to admit to you that that would take us some time to look at it in part, because every single rule is different. Every single product is different. And I'd be curious to know the specifics of your case if you're finding that the application of the rules of origin by the two different customs authorities, on one hand CBSA in Canada, on the other hand CBP in the US, is different. If that's the case, I'd certainly be curious to understand, what the precedents are that lead you to believe that, or what the procedural history of your situation is today.
Yeah, and so we can make some connections after this as well. We will be sending out to everybody that's registered a link to the recording of this session, but also all the panelists' contact information as well. So you'll be able to reach out and Mike, I can connect you specifically on that question as well. Okay, one more pre-submitted question. Have you seen a shift in investor sentiment or deal activity in response to the recent tariff changes? And I'll go to Federica for that one.
So generally, yes, there is hesitation. And really it's about investors asking the questions about how the impact of these tariffs will be sort of for the business going forward. But maybe I'd like to say that it is a bit sector specific. Of course, it affects more than others the export intensive businesses. So as you know, we don't see tariffs on services. So service type businesses aren't seeing sort of the same level of hesitation. I think that when it comes to deal activity in response to tariffs, I don't want to just simply say that it's just doom and gloom. There are going to be investors interested in the Canadian market from all over the world. And those are going to present opportunities. And we are already hearing not just about Canadian companies looking at the US, which is one of the questions we're receiving a lot of, but we're also seeing international companies interested in Canada and possibly what the opportunities exist with changes in the trading landscape. So I think one of the things that probably will also affect investor sentiment and deal activity is really going to be where the banks are on a lot of these deals. I can say that, where banks are tightening up some of their lending, that's going to result in deals maybe, again, halting, taking a pause. So we really want to sort of differentiate between businesses that will be greatly impacted and those that will not. And hopefully this will also present some opportunities for companies.
Thank you. So a live question from this morning. I think I know the answer, but maybe not. Do we need to pay a tariff on the shipping costs? We are a Canadian company and they're responsible for the shipping. Additionally, the PO from the US customer states that 15% shipping is included in the cost of each line item. So do we need to deduct the 15% shipping cost when preparing the customs invoice?
I can take that, and then Mike can add if you want. So if it's transportation from the place of direct shipment to Canada, so basically, like Incoterms can get complicated, but if it's from the supplier to the end customer, then yes, those can be deducted for customs purposes, and you want to pull those out. This landscape has made a lot of companies take a look at their paperwork, their shipping terms, what's included in the declared value. So that's one piece that definitely can be pulled out.
Yeah. So on the flip side too, right? So the broader picture is Canada, along with the US and the vast majority of countries that operate under the World Trade Organization's Customs Valuation Agreement, will all have what we call FOB pricing paradigms for declaring the customs value, which is to say, yes, the actual freight cost, and this is important because I think the question here presumes a percentage allocation type of approach out of the price. But in reality, it is the actual freight cost, the extent that you have access to the records of the costs paid to the carrier for those freight costs that can be deducted. You can be at some risk. The materiality really depends on the delta between the estimated inclusive pricing cost that your supplier is giving you and the actual cost that were paid on transport. The difference between the sort of actual and estimated could be your potential risk in customs if customs were to audit this carefully. General idea, like Ray said, from the place shipped directly across the border, it will be deductible from price as long as the price includes it and as long as you can prove that the price includes, in fact, recovery of costs for the freight.
Well, that's a little bit of good news then, I think. Okay, so this is another one. I think I know the answer, but we'll see. Digital services, taxation and tariffs. How might they impact private and public sector organizations in the US importing digital data services from Canadian organizations? Mike, for that one, please.
So far, we haven't really heard, as far as I can tell, an elaborate policy from the United States on how there could be potential reciprocity, which is what the United States understands they possibly need to operate on the basis of, vis-a-vis things like Canadian GST, taxation of certain digital services, or alternatively, the digital services tax in France and other jurisdictions that are in fact targeting the digital services provided by some of the largest companies in the world, all of which are American, right? We're talking, of course, the big three, Amazon, Facebook, and the like, Alphabet Corporation. We could go on. And so, is there currently an impact? The answer should be no, because for the time being, the tariffs are only levied against goods. The reciprocity, whether it be the foreseen reciprocity by the United States, the presumptive, I guess, reciprocity by the United States against what they consider have been unfair trade barriers for many, many years. Okay, right or wrong, we can sort of leave that part aside. Or whether it's the countermeasures that are being introduced by other countries in light of these tariffs that the US is imposing. None of these are currently directly affecting anything in the service industry, including digital transfers.
Right. Okay. Do you foresee there being any drawbacks on the tariffs, both import and export, that companies have paid? And so I believe that that is available on the Canadian side, but not on the US side. Is that correct, Ray?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, correct. Right now, and we're still waiting to hear how the U.S. might look at that, but that's been pulled off the table from the very beginning by the U.S. administration, which was really a shift from the last round of these tariffs back in the end of like 2018-19, and that's causing a lot of angst, especially for this region. We do have some programs in Canada. There is duty drawback, which is quite simply put, is that you pay duty if you use the goods that are imported and the duty is paid. They go into further manufacturing and the goods are shipped back in some form. There's drawback availability to that. The big problem, again, in this region is scrap is not included. CBSA will have the scrap pulled out of that calculation, which again are some issues. There are programs that we have in Canada that are similar but different to this, and it's duty deferral. So again, with drawback, you pay the duty, you have to apply to get it back, and it's pretty onerous and time consuming to get the money back. So there's a cash flow issue. Duty deferral is similar where the goods come in. You have to apply in advance for this to get a duty deferral license, which again just defers the duty. So there is no cash outlay for the duty. There is reporting responsibilities back to CBSA. There is audits by CBSA on these. And then the last one, and again, anybody in the automotive industry down here, we had representation from finance earlier this week that is talking about the remission applications and the opportunities within finance to apply for remission. Remission was used again last go around on these tariffs by certain industries, certain companies, and that is like duty deferral and duty remission applications are not simply just filling out a form and you get carte blanche. I mean, there is certain work that is involved in that. But again, those are programs that are available and should be pursued.
And just to add to that too, we do have, if you go on the investwindsoressex.com website, we do have a list of foreign trade zone programs. Those, the programs that Ray has mentioned, not the remission one isn't on there because that is specific to now, but the duty drawback and the duty relief program are listed on there. And you'll find that I think the rest will all be on the We Trade Task Force website. We have the links to those programs there as well. Okay. Let me go back to a couple of pre-submitted questions. Do you foresee there being, oh no, we did that already, sorry. How do you get the registration for Exporters of Processing Services program, and what is the next process after getting approval for the program? How can we import goods without paying the GST? And I know there is a website for this. I could possibly put that in the chat, but maybe if Mike could address that a little bit.
Sure. For the detailed process, you'd have to call us, is my joke, because I think we wrote the detailed process in parentheses here. That said, for a 1 minute or less answer, so there is an application. The application is subject to review by the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA. The Canada Revenue Agency can review books, records, systems, narratives that they will ask in response to queries on how you are in fact accounting for import GST, how you're accounting for your GST, HST returns as well, and may even want to conduct a site visit in some cases to grant you this. I would note that the Exporters of Processing Services program is really the counterpart of what Ray was just referring to, which is the duty relief program, also known to some as the duty deferral program, because the duty relief program does not relieve GST, but the IOPS does that. The Exporters of Processing Services does that. Once you have approval, so once this whole process is gone through, again, in this case with the Canada Revenue Agency, not Customs, you will obtain a certificate number. That certificate number is then going to be listed on every import transaction. And when you list that certificate number, you essentially do not record any GST owing. Your customs broker will know how to specifically operate the filing of your import declarations under currently, of course, the CARM system that was implemented last year. For anything beyond that, I'd be happy to chat about you with the specifics of what it is that you need assistance with.
Perfect. We did have quite a few questions pre-submitted that are sort of on the same theme around what do you, if these tariffs remain in place, if this is a long-term situation, what do you see happening to cities like Windsor, regions like Windsor, Essex that are so reliant on cross-border trade? And I'll pose that one to Federica.
Yeah, so I think, obviously cross-border trade is going to continue to play a factor in our community. And if we are turning the page on globalization 2.0, businesses are very resilient. Given that it plays such a crucial role and is such a factor, high trade sensitive businesses are certainly going to be looking to change the way that they do businesses. And Wendy, I think you spoke to this a little bit, but I think the most important message is that companies have options, they have choices. With 15 free trade agreements that give access to 51 countries and over 1.5 billion consumers, I think businesses need to understand that they are going to pivot and change and look for opportunities. There are world markets, there are potentially interprovincial trade barriers that will be eliminated. Access to waterways will create opportunities. And I do want people to sort of walk away knowing that, this isn't the end. There are going to be clear opportunities that have already been forged by our government to be able to look strategically at where we pivot to next. And then certainly where we move to a more service-based economy, of course, again, when we talk about, some of the US and major economies, the service sector will continue to remain high in terms of priority.
Yeah, we definitely want to, it's been tough times, but we do want to stress on the positive as much as we can. So going to a live question, a little bit more of a statement than a question, but sorting out the origin criterion, and this has been brought up earlier as well on the USMCA paperwork, is getting more complicated. I'm not sure if there's anything to help alleviate that at all.
Well, specific advice for sure, I guess, right? On specific codes will differ, but generally speaking, if we're talking about the four criterions, it's, you're either wholly obtained or produced, which is to say everything from extraction to the last phase of production was done in the territory. Or alternatively, you will need to justify some of what's happening in your value chain and in your bill of materials with non-originating materials. They may or may not meet a criterion per se. They may or may not meet criterion B, which is specific to the way that specific products may incorporate tariff shifts from their components into the final product and be deemed originating, which is to say specific materials that are non-originating. Or you may fall into criterion D, which is an interesting one, which is for unassembled and disassembled goods, where the value of assembly or reassembly in the USMCA territory far exceeds the value of the unassembled or disassembled good. That is to say 50% under net cost or 60% under transaction value method. In those situations, there's some thinking and planning. And yeah, it is absolutely complex. It is absolutely the case that if you're walking away from one of these things with a bit of headache, that's my everyday, just so we're clear. So happy to help where we can. I'm sure Ray has similar experiences. Ray, if you have anything to add, by all means.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing to add to Mike is it's extremely complicated. Like the CUSMA certificates and the criteria that Mike was talking about, it is under the microscope right now because of what the U.S. administration has said, that if the goods are CUSMA compliant, this is going to be probably the first time a lot of companies have really looked at their certificates and really trying to understand the different boxes, because prior to, like, most certificates are blanket certificates for a calendar year period and they create them. Sometimes the template for creation of those certificates is just to change the date, which is a concern, because really, have you validated that the certificate is accurately completed and the criteria that you're saying that the goods that are listed on that certificate are accurate? So, like, it's a this is not an easy answer. It's just not carte blanche that you can say, but it is under the microscope. It's scrutiny right now, making sure.
And Ray, weren't you one of the first to get automated electronic bill of materials across to CBSA some years ago to prove NAFTA origination back when it was NAFTA? So yeah. Ray certainly knows the details of all of this very intimately.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple questions that are a little bit similar, related to each other, so I'm kind of going to merge them together. Is there a resource available to find tariff rates based on the HS codes or other product codes? And following along with that, is there a centralized place where people can just get all the information easily and in an understandable way? Following on this whole confusion question. So Ray, if you could address.
Yeah, and again, this is I have to caveat this. This is just similar to the question on certificates of origin. Um, the tariff classification is a code. It's international to 6 digits. So if a good is classified to the 6 digits, it's good internationally, and we'll just narrow scope it for this discussion. So the same good crossing the border should have the same classification, and most times there's times when it won't, to the 6 digit. So the 7th to the 10th digit of the full HS code is country specific. So um, so you will take a look at, so in this realm of importations, if you take a look at your US entry, 7501 entry, and then you take a look at a B3, or well, it's not a B3 anymore, it's a CAD in the CARM world, the tariff classification should be the same 6 digit if they are exactly the same item. And I have to say that, exactly the same item. That list of tariff classifications, yes, there are resources. And what I'll do, Wendy, is I'll send you the links to those. There's one on CBP or CBSA. And then there's also the World Customs Organization has a listing of that. But I need to caveat, it's not just looking for what your goods are and trying to find it. And because there's rules that go behind that. You need to have years in the industry to be able to properly classify goods, because you can't just say, well, it's a part of. So you look for the part of, like what the item is it's a widget making machine. So you have all these parts going into a widget making machine, and there's a parts provision. You can't do that. If there's nuts, bolts, screws, like goods of general use, you have to pull them out. So there's rules that go behind this. And I'm just going to stop there, because this is one of the most complicated areas within the world that Mike and I deal in, is tariff classification and properly classifying the goods. But I will send you the links, Wendy, that you can distribute it to the audience. And again, that's really where your trusted advisors can help. If you're a regular importer, you should have a listing of your commodities that you're sending and you're receiving, and having a list of the tariff classifications that are declared, and you should review those at least once a year, just to make sure is there any changes at that. And again, mostly because I'll just use a thing like the previous place that I worked at. The managing partner came around and he said, you know what, it's taken you 6.5 years to get popular. Now you're the most popular person in the office. And that's really, trade and customs has always been kind of under the mushroom. Like, we've always been there, practitioners. But it's because we're in a different world. But now it's relevant because everybody, CEOs and everybody within industry, is looking at this, because a lot of the tools that we deal with are being exposed and scrutinized. And I'll leave it at that.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of things have to be considered now that people didn't consider before, for sure. So, and I think we're going to go to a live question. I kind of think I know the answer, because I think the answer is it depends. But we're a manufacturing company and all of our products fall under CUSMA or USMCA. Are we susceptible to any tariffs? And I'm thinking that the answer is going to be, it depends on what the products are and what they're made out of. Is that? Oh, Mike,
Yeah, Mike, you're on mute.
About that. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's correct. So again, as we were kind of broaching on earlier, and this, we can repeat this 1,000 times. There are very many implications to what is called the regime of rules of origin under any given free trade agreement. In fact, CUSMA has its own, and other trade agreements have their own. And in fact, there is a non-preferential origin determination regime for situations where you're not claiming trade preference. And the question then becomes, well, what is the country of origin then? Short version is, if you manufacture in the territory of the USMCA or CUSMA, I guess is how we Canadians say it, you are in fact adding value to that product in this territory. The extent to which you're adding value can be relevant, which is, say, the percentage of what is called regional value content of your finished product can be relevant to determining whether or not the product is originating. And otherwise, there are certain components of certain classifications, typically classifications that are very close in the value chain to the level of production where the finished product is, are usually excluded from being allowed to quote unquote transform from a non-originating product, a non-originating input into an originating product. Usually lower level of production components are less problematic, regardless where you bring them from. But that's a very generic answer that I'm giving you here. It really, really, really depends. You must look at the specific rules applicable to your product. You must understand the origin criteria. You must certify your goods and have documentation whereby you actually stated that these meet the criteria when you are intending to declare them for preferential purposes at customs.
Perfect. Okay, going back to some of the pre-submitted questions. Total amount to be tariffed, does that include design, things like design and labor, or just the material? Ray, if you can take that one.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, the answer is yes.
Okay.
If you think of the total amount to be tariffed, the appropriate sort of technical terminology in our world is the customs value. So the customs value declare is typically based on a price paid or payable for the goods. That's assuming there's a sale. There are, of course, situations where you transfer goods across borders without a change in ownership. Those have their own sets of alternative valuation methods that we can discuss, perhaps over another webinar, since I could spend a whole webinar discussing just valuation, no problem. But when it comes to there being a sale for export, and we are talking about price paid or payable in a sale for export, and the customs value is determined on that basis, on the basis of an invoice price. That invoice price is not given sort of full faith by customs that it in fact represents the inherent physical value of the physical good crossing a physical boundary. That's what customs cares about imposing a tariff on. The actual physical, however sort of abstract that may seem to you, that's the presumption of customs, something physical of value crossed the border, and I need to know that value of that physical thing. Its price is informative, but not determinative of its value. Its price is the starting point. But if you are having other contributions to the value chain that produce that product, things that were necessary for its production, such as design, such as material inputs, perhaps provided free of cost or at no cost to the person who in fact manufactured or produced the goods, right? You as the buyer might give certain instructions on how you want it made. Those instructions, the value behind them, the workforce that generated those, whether it be an engineering department or a fashion design department, depending on your industry, those values, as far as customs is concerned, are in fact values that are now incorporated into and inherent in the good crossing the border. Therefore, in most cases, specifics of course matter, the devil's in the details, but in most cases, the answer to your question is yes. Those costs will need to be included in the price, or where not included in the price will need to be added to the price in order to obtain a compliant customs value.
Okay, so we have, there's one pre-submitted question and also a live question that are similar to each other. So I'm going to do my best to sort of combine those two. Both have to do with getting raw materials in from the US, making a product here and shipping them back. So the pre-submitted question was, it was a little bit different. Importing a Canadian-made product, reworking it, delivering it back to the US. Is it the original piece value or just the rework portion? And then the other related question is, the US customer sends raw steel, it's manufactured here in the Windsor area to the point where the end product is an automotive part. Do we still have to pay tariffs on the steel because it came from the US, even though we did not purchase that steel? So the customer sent the steel, it's reworked here, and the same US customer will be receiving the manufactured part.
Yeah, so I can add in, and Mike might be able to add. This is again, this is a lot of questions because of the area that we're in.
Right.
So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer on this because so a slab of steel comes in, it's reworked, and it goes back. That slab of steel, the Canadian, like the company in Windsor, doesn't own that. It's customer supplied. It comes in, it's declared, and then it goes back. It has to be separated on the invoice. We recommend separating it on the invoice of the value of the original material. The US, and again, I don't have a definitive answer on this because it is contentious, is in the US, they have what they refer to as Chapter 98 provisions, which are US goods returned, and then can those be separated so they don't attract the tariffs? The USMCA or the Kuzma part does come into play here, but there is the 98 provision in these scenarios has been excluded. So you can't use the 98 provision in most cases, but it's an area that needs to be looked at individually just to see. Again, there's not a definitive answer, Wendy, on that. But it's this cross border and the multiple times that a part might cross in varying stages. So then you get into substantial transformation, wording and rules. So this is an area that again, a lot of work needs to be needs to be reviewed, I think, to get a definitive answer for each individual scenario.
Yeah, and I just noticed too, there was another question that came in this morning, very similar to that. So hopefully we're answering a few people's questions with that.
So just a quick thought on this one. So fully agreed with everything Ray said. I would add, if we're talking about steel and aluminum, which are their own category of tarification now in the United States, which have very specific rules for those supply chains. One of the things that'll matter here is the country of smelt and cast of the aluminum. Insofar as you have documentation tracing the country of smelt and cast of the aluminum, and you can demonstrate that certain aluminum or steel content was originally smelt and cast in the United States, that value could be deductible from the customs value when you declare your importation into the US. It's the only thing I had to add, but otherwise I think Ray did it justice.
And just to that too, Wendy, just to add on to what Mike was saying too, is you have to look at your domestic suppliers too, because a lot of times you buy domestically from the company, they might have brought it in from the US. So you need to be very, very careful around that. So I'll just leave it at that.
So I've got a couple, I know we're gonna run up against our deadline. I knew we wouldn't get to everything, but we'll try and get a few more in here. Maybe this is a shorter question. This is one of the live questions. Are any steel they purchase from the US importing into Canada, are they responsible, is the Canadian company responsible to pay for the tariffs importing to Canada? I'm assuming that depends on what the arrangement is with the.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's contractual first and foremost, I would say, which is to say, in your contracted terms of sale, who agreed to do that piece? That's one. And second of all, it's a factual question after the goods have crossed the border. So it's a question of contractual liability before you've declared them. Once you've declared them, the party who has declared them and whose name the importation was made is the factual importer of record, who is factually directly responsible to customs for payment. Whether or not some of that liability can be passed on because of the pre-existing contractual considerations, that's a bigger question. And in fact, it can go in different ways, as I mentioned earlier. It really depends on what that contract says in terms of who has liability for it.
Okay. Again, I'm going to try and sweep through a few. So there was one question about whether attendees can contact you folks directly. I believe that's sort of the point of us sending you guys or sending everyone contact information. So I believe that is correct. You're open to being contacted, so that's great. We also have more of a statement from Mark at APAG. So APAG is looking for guidance on supporting guidance and support on exploring automotive and especially non-automotive possibilities in Canada. They produce electronic parts and assemblies for automotive here in Windsor. So again, I think this is maybe, connecting further, possibly for additional guidance is that question. And I think those connections will be made, so that's good. So sort of a different question to Federica. What are the potential risk factors that should be considered if a business is evaluating purchasing a company abroad?
Okay, so obviously anytime that you've got a question like this, we can't answer it in one sitting. But anytime you've got sort of considerations, and we've seen this, a lot of businesses interested in acquiring or potentially setting up shop in the US, what should we consider? And it's a bit of a loaded question because it doesn't necessarily just mean that there's advantageous. Anytime that you're dealing with another jurisdiction, you've got multiple considerations. You've got the regulatory environment and, what is it like to do business in those countries? You've got different tax jurisdictions that you absolutely need to best understand. You've got profits that get repatriated back to Canada. So withholding and transfer pricing considerations. There's differences in accounting standards and required reporting and tax compliance. And then there's just the operational challenges. Having said all that, I think, back to the point that Ray and Chris and all of us have been making, there are trusted advisors that do this and can help if someone is looking to set up either overseas in the US or in North American continent, or if they're looking at partners that wish to set up here. We are definitely seeing more interest in doing things like strategic alliances and joint ventures. And that may be something that companies can consider as an interim step. And so I know we've got just another minute or so, but certainly this is an opportunity to reach out to your advisors on questions like this and how to best do that.
And I'm going to take just one quick stab, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Question about this: as the tariffs continue to be paused and reintroduced, what are the mechanisms to recover tariffs paid when exporting products to the U.S.? And I think that's going back again to the duty drawback program that is available on the Canadian side. So there's a link, and we'll send the link with our follow-up email as well to the foreign trade zone programs. And those are available for companies to get some of that duty back if possible. So I think if we could just say a quick thanks to our panelists, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Donnelly, who is the CEO of the Windsor Regional Chamber and co-chairing with us on the task force. So over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Wendy. First of all, thanks very much to Invest Windsor Essex for first co-chairing this task force that we're on, coordinating this webinar and our continued partnership and supporting the region here. Second, while I have the opportunity, thanks for the Economic Task Force, all the members that have been supporting our economy and region for the last couple of months. On a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week, we're coordinating, spending time, not necessarily to represent their own personal best interest, but the general best interest of the community. Third, of course, thank you, Federica, Ray, and Mike for your professional extensive knowledge you've shared here today. Capital Assist, Doane, Thornton, M&P, and the organizations you represent have been active members of our task force, have been extremely supportive, and of course, and as everybody's witnessed today, you are true experts, and I encourage those follow-up conversations to have. And finally, my message, I guess, from the Chamber of Commerce. And it's never changed. We're going on 150 years. Look local first, support your friends, colleagues, your network. This ongoing trade issue that we are having will impact and has impacted our community. As this filters down to our smaller businesses, make sure or consider spending your dollars locally to ensure that dollars stay in our community and food continues to put on our friends and colleagues' tables. So Those are my points, and thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. And so we have maybe 6 or 7 questions that we did not get to. I'll reach out to our panelists and see if we can get answers for those folks on the questions. I knew that was going to happen, but anyways, we did our best to get to. We got to a lot of questions. So thanks again to Federica, Mike, and Ray. And we look forward to working with you going into the future. And we'll be in touch probably early next week with the follow-up email.
Thanks,
Great.
Wendy.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Have a
take
good
care.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.